Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Last Honest Realtor. I'm your host, David Fleming. Thanks for joining me today in what will be the last podcast of 2024. And I appreciate you watching on YouTube, listening on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you get your podcasts since we started this back in April. Now, I have been writing blogs on Toronto Realty blogs since 2007, but the podcast is a bit of a newer venture. We are approaching, I believe, 30 episodes, so far so good. And today's topic is going to be of a year-end variety. We're going to look at the top 5 real estate stories of the year, essentially, subjectively chosen by me, but essentially through the eyes of Toronto Realty blogs. So, as I've mentioned, blogging since 2007. If you're somehow watching this or listening to this right now, having not been familiar with Toronto Realty blog, well, hey, there's a plug. Go and take a look. It's something I've been doing 3, 4, 5 times a week, as it was when I started, for, almost 2 decades now. So in looking at the year-end content, and I, every year at the end of the year, do a post for the top 5 blogs, and then a post for the top 5 topics. In choosing the top 5 topics, I essentially go through all of the content I've written and try to put it into different categories, at the end of which I will look and say, well, here's a category where there was 7, 8, 9, or 10 posts associated with it. That's clearly one of the top topics of the year. Then again, there's also the more objective viewpoint, which is to sit back and say, well, I sell real estate. What were the big topics of the year? And of course, which ones will be interesting? So that's essentially what I've done. And while interest rates and inflation are big topics, well, they're boring. I didn't write specifically about them that much this year. And they're really part and parcel of many of the topics that we will discuss today. So while those might be at the forefront for many people, they're not topics on their own per se. And we'll get into that shortly. So let's get right into it now, folks. I'm going to first tell you what were the top 5 stories of 2023, according to Toronto Realty blog. Number 5, we had something called Condos, Development, and Preconstruction. That was kind of catch-all. Number 4, we had changing business practices amid a changing market. 2023 was definitely a changing market. Number 3, we had landlords and tenants. Number 2, we had pricing. And number 1 topic in 2023 was something I called the future of housing in Toronto. And if you look at these 5 topics and then the 5 that we chose this year, the titles are different, but on the whole, I'd say there's quite a bit of overlap, as you might expect. So the number 5 topic was something I called the death of pre-construction condos. Sort of the death of the pre-construction condo industry. Well, yes and no. I'd say really the death of the sales. And as I go through this point, you'll see exactly why. Now, I guess I have to start by giving a very quick overview of my thoughts on pre-con, because some people are watching this for the very first time. Some have heard me say this for 15 years. You're like, oh my God, he's doing it again. I got into the business in 2004. I started the blog in 2007. It wasn't long after before I realized there's something inherently wrong with the way that we build condos in the province of Ontario. We pre-sell them. We sell nothing. We sell air. We sell a contract and a promise and a hope and a wish and a dream. But when the pre-con prices were lower than resale, hey, that makes sense. I'm taking a risk. I'm buying something that's not done. I should pay less for it. Eventually, what ended up happening is prices became level with resale and then surpassed resale, which made absolutely no sense to me. And the somewhat infamous video I did years ago, and this was 13 years ago, comparing cake to cake mix, is the perfect analogy to explain my thoughts on pre-con pricing. If you were to buy a cake for $5 and the cake mix was $1, you might say, it's advantageous. I can bake my own cake and save money. Again, per the analogy, what's the time value? Are you doing it with your kids? Do you enjoy baking as a hobby? Just work with me as far as the analogy goes. If the cake was $10 and the cake mix was 50 cents, now we're talking. But what happens if the cake is $5 and the cake mix is $5? Why in the world would I take the time to bake the cake? Okay, how about the cake is $5 and the cake mix is $8? That's what happened in the pre-construction condominium industry, and it made absolutely no sense to me. There are some people that view pre-con investing as a financial vehicle, an instrument, if you will, and they're able to manipulate exactly when they deploy their capital and minimize the downside risk of a bad tenant or all of the down payment necessary to close on a resale property. Sure, I understand that. And for the 1% of geniuses in every market, it works. For the other 99%, I always felt they were just sheep. And people say, oh, I've made a ton of money on pre-con. Right, that's not my point. My point is that when you bought it $800 a foot, sold for $1,000 a foot, resale was $600 a foot. So what the heck? Now, as far as this pertains to the blog, and of course, throughout the year, the topic at hand. It began in March 28th. I wrote, how is the market for condominium assignments? And it was kind of rhetorical or sarcastic because the market was absolutely god-awful. And here's where I started to say, I've been saying this all along. I was right. And thank you to Ben Rabideau during our podcast. He gave me credit for that. 55 Mercer Street, a unit for sale for $608,000 and change. Well, it's not a unit for sale. It's an assignment for sale. It's 479 square feet. That's $1,270 per square foot. Sounds like a crazy price, but here's the rub. This is $152,000 less than the original pre-construction purchase price, which was almost $1,600 a foot. This was in March. This was a blog post I wrote where I took actual assignments from some real estate agent that was spamming me, and thankfully he or she did because I had great fodder for the blog. And I noted that all of these people were essentially walking away from their entire down payments, their deposits being held in trust with the developer. So if you bought a pre-con for almost $800,000 and now you're looking to get out of it for just over $600,000, you're eating a massive loss. And this is what was happening in March. Now, around the same time, interestingly enough, there was a Toronto Star headline that said, pre-construction condo buyers forced to offload units for as much as $150,000 less than they paid. Yeah, around the same time. Seems like we were on the same page. $150,000 less than they paid. It's ironic. It's like the pre-construction investors are basically financing the condominium boom. Here, I'm going to buy this place. Oh, it's gone down in value. I'll sell it to somebody else. I'll take the loss. The developer gets their money. The next buyer gets theirs. And that investor absorbs the loss. And that, in my opinion, is what is going to happen to essentially everything that gets built over the next couple of years. So this led to another blog post that I wrote in April. And the juxtaposition is fantastic, if you will. I wrote TRB Pre-Construction Review, Freed Hotel and Residences. And in this blog, I analyzed a new development by Freed, which was for this la-di-da condo hotel where they were trying to sell pre-construction units on paper in pre-sales for, ready, the low, low price of up to $2,400 per square foot. That's crazy, right? I mean, that's an insano price. But in the context of, on the one hand, we've got a Toronto Star article saying that people are offloading units for $150,000 less than they paid. And we've got David writing a blog about actual assignments people are losing money on. And on the other hand, we've got a developer trying to obliterate records price per square foot. Now, it's funny, on my blog, I'm a big movie buff. Well, really movies that were after the year 2000 because I live in the past. But remember in Dumb and Dumber, the scene where they're standing around a fire and Harry Dunn, played by Jeff Daniels, says, "My hands are freezing." And then Jim Carrey, Lloyd Christmas, says, "Oh, why don't you take these extra gloves? My hands are getting a little bit sweaty." Can you see the analogy here? You have people walking away from deposits and begging folks to buy their assignments, and they're taking $150,000 hits. And then you got a developer trying to obliterate the record for price per square foot. $2,400. That's absolutely ludicrous. So in June, I wrote another review, TRB Pre-Construction Review, something called RAINE, R-E-I-N-E. This was in Mississauga, micro condos selling for $1,333 a foot. Yeah. Sales in neither project were great. I heard through the grapevine that the Freed project sold maybe a handful of units. Now, the irony is, because of the way we build in the province of Ontario, if people aren't buying in pre-con, developers aren't building condos, and then 3, 4, 5 years down the line, we're going to have a massive deficit in a province that's already experiencing a housing crisis because there's not enough. Now, throughout the year, I was tracking headlines by Urbanation. Urbanation, if you're not familiar with their work, they're a think tank. They're brilliant. They have some of the best data out there as it pertains to real estate. Listen to these headlines as they get progressively worse. February 1st, headline reads, GTA new condo sales fell to 15-year low in 2023. April 22nd, headline reads, GTHA new condo sales fall 71% below 10-year average. July 18th, headline reads, slowest first half for GTHA new condo sales in 27 years. October 18th, headline reads, GTHA new condo sales fall to nearly 30-year low in Q3 of 2024. Now, within that report, it noted two fantastic statistics. New condo sales fell 81% year over year. Keep in mind, the first headline said new condo sales fell to 15-year low in 2023. Put it together, and we are down 81% from the fewest in 15 years. I think we need a mathematician to figure that one out. The second point was new condo sales were 87% below the latest 10-year average for Q3 periods. It's absolutely wild. So I understand some people might champion this. They might cheer it. The people that spray paint and graffiti on development application signs downtown and put affordable housing now. Listen, the way that we build in the province of Ontario, and I don't mean we because I absolutely hate the system, is that you don't even have a hole in the ground before you start selling. And you sell the hope and the wish and the promise and the dream. And then once you get to 70, 80% sold, the bank finances it, you go ahead and build. So if nobody is buying pre-construction condos, then nobody is building condos. And then nothing gets built, and then the housing crisis is exacerbated. But I wasn't wrong at the beginning of the year when I said that nothing is going to sell in pre-construction this year because the prices make no sense. And if you look at somebody that paid $1,700 a foot 5 years ago in pre-con because they thought it was going to shoot to the moon, and now they're trying to get rid of it for $1,300 a foot, they still can't because the resale next door is $900. My second story of the year, which is actually number 4 because we're working in reverse. The number 4 story of the year is the role of investors. Now, there's a bit of overlap with the previous point, the death of the pre-construction industry. As I said, everything's intertwined. But it started for me and on Toronto Realty blog, February 12, 2024, when I wrote a blog called Putting My Money Where My Mouth Is, because I detailed the story of how I bought an investment condo. I wasn't in the market. That's the funny thing. There was a unit that was for sale all through 2023. Couldn't sell. It was a tough condo market. And then this unit was for sale at a rock bottom price in early January. And I looked at this and I said, this can't be right. Called the listing agent. He said, yeah, it is. They want out really badly. I pitched it to a couple different investors. Nobody bid. And I said, you know what? I'll buy it myself. And I paid $499 sticker price, right? Throw in the commission, it's $484 for a unit that they had listed as high as $599 the previous year, for which that model at the absolute peak sold for $620. So it's not every property. It's not every investor, every buyer, every end user is down that percentage. It's just these people needed to sell. And well, I went in and I bought it. That's not the only condo I bought this year, and that's not the only story that I told this year, but let me go throughout the rest of the year. I started to notice a trend in the headlines, and it was a little concerning. It was that a lot of the headlines in newspapers started to essentially blame investors for everything wrong with the real estate market. Now, on a long enough time horizon, you'll see anyone and anything and everyone and everything blamed by the media for the housing crisis. And if you think back to the boogeyman, foreign buyers. Remember 2017, foreign buyers. Everything was about foreign buyers. There's always a bad guy. It's flippers, it's speculators, it's real estate agents, of course. It's everyone and everything except, the simple truths, which is that real estate's expensive. There's not enough of it. Taxes make up 36% of the cost of new homes, which we've covered ad nauseum. But as I started to compile a list, I noticed, I'm sorry to say, Toronto Star. That's not as bad as Blog TO. But Toronto Star had a lot of these headlines. So January 9th, Toronto made a bylaw to crack down on Airbnb and other short-term renters. Now companies are instructing investor owners how to evade the rules. Ooh, the evil property owners. Imagine someone who's so evil that they would buy a condo for someone else to live in and try to maximize their capital. Yeah, okay, well, I understand bylaws. I understand the rule of law. But I don't know, the companies are instructing investor owners how to evade the rules. I think that law is a gray area. We'll leave it at that. July 20th. Toronto's condo market is in recessionary territory as investors can no longer prop it up. Yes, they're propping it up. Thank you for that headline. August 17th. Toronto wants more family-sized condos. Here's why what's being built just doesn't work. Yeah, I know. Investors are to blame 100%. Yep, everything that's been built, it's their fault. How about this? October 3rd. Investors own 65% of Toronto's smaller condo units. StatsCan finds. Yep, clickbait. Thank you. How about this? October 11th, investors wreaked havoc on Toronto's condo market, leaving us with tiny units no one wants. This to me was the one where I was like, all right, I'm going to jump in here. And so I'll come back to that in a moment because first I want to note August 26th, I wrote a blog post called Are Smaller Condos Breeding Intelligence or Entitlement? And this was in response to an article from the Globe and Mail. First-time homebuyers are shunning today's shrinking condos. So this article interviewed folks in their early 20s who, in my opinion, have no business demanding to own a home. I'm sorry, Toronto's a world-class city. 21 years old in Paris and London? No, you're not demanding to own a home. But these people proudly declare they have no interest in owning a condo. And of course, all conclusions drawn on today's condo market goes back to the source, which is that investors are to blame, right? Investors are buying pre-construction condos. These condos are shrinking, young people don't want them, and thus we're not going to blame the 21-year-old who wants to own a 4-bedroom detached home in a prime area for being entitled, but rather we blame investors for ruining the housing market. So that's where this next article comes into focus. Investors wreaked havoc on Toronto's condo market, leaving us with tiny units no one wants. And that's when I wrote this blog post, Are investors to blame, quote unquote, for Toronto's condo market? I took issue with the entire thesis of this article, but in a nutshell, this is the problem. And this is a quote from the article. Investors own almost 60% of condos built since 2016, and they've been dictating what gets built. So this is a real chicken and egg scenario because either the investors dictated what gets built or the developers built whatever was easiest to sell. And I believe it's the latter because, as I mentioned, in our system, developers build units they can pre-sell in a for-profit industry where profits has shrunk to zero in 2024, which is why nothing gets built. And thanks to overtaxation, poor public policy, and one of the most inefficient rezoning and approval process you'll ever see anywhere in North America, that is why developers build what they build. 2024 was truly the year of blaming investors for everything wrong with the real estate market. And as I said, it's only a few years ago that we were blaming foreign buyers with an absolute certainty that they were responsible for every problem in the market. And so I ask, what will it be in 2025? If we're not blaming investors, what will it be? So I understand the slants that these articles have taken. I understand the way that they view it. Me, as a fiscal conservative, as somebody that truly believes in the fundamentals of economics, both macro and micro, and of course, what I think the role of government should be in any capitalist society, I would point to the fact that, which I've covered multiple times, 35.6% on average of the price of any new home is made up of taxes at the 3 levels of government. I also wrote blogs earlier this year noting that the approval process is absolutely archaic and that on average, I believe it's 2.2 years for approval. And there was a statistic of how much that adds to every unit of housing because, again, like developers are for profit. I'm sorry, we don't live in a utopia somewhere. They're not going to build if they're not making money, nor should you expect them to. So if the government is overtaxing and the government is adding all of these weeks, months, in some cases years to the time it takes to get shovels in the ground, you know, developers are going to build what they can pre-sell. And they've been building a lot of small condos that, quote, nobody wants. Investors played a massive role in the market in 2024. And as noted, I would ask, what are we going to see next year? Who are we going to blame? Now, my third story, number 3, if you will, working backwards or forwards, is simply sales. That's it, sales. Not sales of pre-con, not lack of sales in freehold. It's just simply sales. Now, I'm a numbers guy, so maybe you're not going to love this point, but I'm going to throw a lot out at you. Let's go back to 2015. In 2015, we saw 101,809 sales. This broke the previous record of 95,223 in 2007. So again, 2015, we topped 100,000 sales first time ever. The next year, the record was further shattered as we saw 113,000 properties traded that year. Now in 2017, we started the year with a bang. We all remember 2017, but then the market slowed because the federal government came in and attempted to cool the market, which they did. They always do when they say they're going to. And the year finished strong, 95,000, 223,000 sales, which was good for number 4 all time back then. Again, it would have been a lot more because sales were absolutely ripping Jan, Feb, March, April. So now we're down the next year, 2018, only 78,000 sales. 2019, we saw an uptick, 88,000, but we're still way behind that record of 113 from only 3 years prior. So then comes the worldwide pandemic and the market slows to a crawl, highlighted by the paltry 2,875 sales recorded in April of 2020, which is the fewest of any month since the 1990s, say when Toronto was a third the size. So as history will show, the pandemic provided Torontonians with many reasons to transact in the real estate market, with some people moving into the city and others moving out, some people going from a house to a condo or a condo to a house, some people deciding they needed more or less space, something maybe with less maintenance, or I need more space because my partner and I are working from home. But bottom line, 2020 recovered massively. And even though we had those pandemic-affected months with very few sales, 2020 finished with 95,579 sales, which was number 3 all time. Now that was just the appetizer for 2021, if you will. So whether it was the pandemic or fear of missing out or the low interest rates, the bears will point to low interest rates, or maybe it was all the above, but 2021 sales came in at, are you ready for this? 122,133. That shattered the 2016 record of 113,076. So peak insanity hit in February and March of 2022. And then just like it did in 2017, the market completely turned around and went cold. So the Bank of Canada began to raise rates at an unprecedented pace. We saw 10 interest rate increases from when they began to when they finished. And get this, folks, 2022, we saw only 75,652 sales. 122,000 in 2021, 75,000 in 2022. But then came 2023. I told you you might be tired of numbers, but bear with me. In 2023, we saw only 66,982, which was the lowest of all time. And I say all time, I've been charting the data since 2002. That is when Treb redistricted. And personally, I draw that line in the sand because I don't care how many properties sold in 1977. It's not applicable. But guys, understanding how much the city has grown over the last 2 decades, if you look at this and say 66,000 units sold in 2023 is less than we saw in 2002, how much smaller was the city then? Or you just look at this and you say 66,982 units sold in 2023, which is literally like almost half of the year before. So as I put on my blog, and this fantastic chart, which you can't see if you're listening. Well, you probably can't see if you're on YouTube either. This fantastic chart I've got on my blog, which is Treb Sales. At the top, we've got 2021, 122,000 sales. At the bottom, we've got 2023, 66,000 sales. And you're saying, David, you told us that this was about the top stories of 2024, and you're giving us a history lesson, culminating with 2023. Why is sales such a big story this year? Well, because we're on pace to basically be right where we were in 2023. And also because David was wrong. I came into this year and, call me crazy, but I said we're going to see 80,000, 90,000 sales. Interest rates are going to decline this year. People will be buying real estate. But as I have written on the blog multiple times, I think that maybe 10 or 20% of people are not, I don't want to say smart enough, but let's say just willing enough to buy ahead of the rate cuts. And if you were smart, sorry to say, I think history will prove, come back to this in 18 months if you will, you would have bought in the fall of 2024 because rates were already going down. And you're going to pay a heck of a lot less for your house in September 2024 than you're going to in May of 2025. But a lot of people just don't want to do that. They want to see that rate in their palm. Why would I buy right now and look at a variable of over 5% when next year it'll be at 4%. I don't know, because the $1 million house is going to be 1.1. So if you look at the numbers, and I did this on the blog, and you compare month to month, listen to these figures, guys. As I mentioned, well, I said 65,982. Treb always has a habit of just rejigging the numbers a little bit. 66,315 units, according to Treb, changed hands in 2023. So far, through the end of November, we've seen 64,625 units. So if I had been told that 2024 sales would end up within 2 to 3% of 2023 sales, I would have vehemently argued against you. And here we are. December Treb sales have averaged 4,448, 2002 through 2023. That would place 2024 sales at 69,073. Having said that, and I might lose you with the numbers here, but in the last 2 years, Treb sales have been way lower than average. My calculation is that we will finish 2024 with approximately 68,425 sales, which is only 3.2% higher than 2023. If that's not one of the top stories of the year, I don't know what is. The fact that we saw the lowest sales ever in 2023, and 2022 was the second lowest, well, third once 2023 came along. The fact that we saw those in 2022 and 2023, and we're about to match 2023 sales, I'm absolutely shocked. And again, I would argue, get ready for next year because the market's going to move big time. And if you wanted to be in the market next year, say you wanted to buy a $3 million house in the Midtown area in May of next year, well, guess what? It's going to be 3.2, 3.3. I really do believe. Sales were a massive story this year. And I guess if I had to flesh out that title, it would be sales or the lack thereof. Now, I'm going to give you one more point before we break. I believe, and I'm going to predict, that we'll see 88,000 sales in 2025. Again, consider we're on pace for 68,000 in 2024. I think we'll see 88,000. And that will put us, if I'm looking at my chart, right in the middle. 2009, 2010, 2019, 2012. It'll put us right in the middle. And not to kind of pat myself in the back by the end of next year, and what's the word here, to drink 2 beers from the same bottle, I will go ahead and say, despite my prediction being 88,000 sales, guys, I would not be surprised if it's even higher. We got 2 more stories to go through. We'll take a quick break. I'll be right back. Welcome back, and we are now on to our number 2 real estate story of the year, which is something that I called the government's impact on the real estate market. Some of you might think, oh boy, here we go. Here comes a big rant from a fiscal conservative and not somebody that necessarily loves the moves that have been made over the last 9 years by the federal government, in which case you'd probably be correct. So away we go. This is the number 2 story. And you might say, is it David's number 2 story or is it the number 2? I would say, hey, if you want to play that game, this could easily be the number 1 story. So pick your poison. But something tells me that at the end of this section, you will more or less agree with me. So in last week's blog post, where I wrote my top 5 blogs of 2024, I went on at great length about the first post that really falls into this category this year. It was called, How Can an Increase in Taxes Mean an Increase in Affordability? That was one of my top 5 posts of the year. And the reason, as I wrote in the blog, why it was one of my top 5 posts was because it's the first time that I'd ever actually outlined every single tax associated with real estate. I mean, we don't need to list them all, do we? I don't know how long you guys have. But read the blog. The amount of taxes associated with real estate, and I just finished telling you in the previous section that 35.6% of the cost, or the price, if you will, for the buyer of new homes in Ontario is made up of taxes. And some of those are included in this, like development charges. But then there's land transfer tax. And you think about the foreign buyer ban, the municipal foreign buyer tax, the provincial foreign buyers tax. We have a vacancy tax. We have an underused housing tax. We have HST, not just on the houses themselves for new construction, but on all of the materials. There are so many taxes, and it's driving the price up, plain and simple. Now, on March 4th, I wrote a fun one. It was called Good Riddance, CMHC Cancels First-Time Homebuyer Incentive. And for the post, I used a feature photo of Ronald McDonald hiding in the bushes. I don't know how I came to find that. I think I Googled clown because I wanted to say that the government were clowns for coming up with this. But it was just so stupid. And again, our federal government they are the same people that just came up with the idea for, you ready for this? An HST holiday. Yeah, an HST holiday, folks. I think maybe like 2% of the population looks at that and really just thinks like it's amazing with absolutely no drawbacks whatsoever. The rest of us are wondering why a responsible government would do this while trying to combat inflation and reduce interest rates. I don't know, but this is clearly an attempt at buying votes by a lame duck government in their final throes of their time in office. And that's essentially, in my opinion, looking back on it, what the first time homebuyer incentive was. Just ridiculousness. The government's going to partner with people that can't afford to buy houses to buy houses. So this is going to be a hot take. You ready for this? Poor people that can't afford to buy homes shouldn't buy homes. I mean, I agree. I'm the one that just said it. But worse would be if the government said, hey, you know those poor people that can't afford to buy homes? Why don't we partner with them to buy homes? And we'll do it with money from taxpayers, and we'll backstop it by the CMHC at the same time. April 1st, I wrote Monday Morning Quarterback, the Renter's Bill of Rights. Now, this was a hot take. This one really angered me because it was some of the worst political posturing I've seen from this government, and there's been a lot of political posturing. This bill, these ideas were absolutely asinine. It's like the bill was written by somebody high on drugs floating in the sky, viewing a utopia through rose-colored glasses. That somebody would also happen to know absolutely nothing about real estate, the real estate market, or economics. This bill called for a nationwide standard lease agreement, as though the Ontario standard lease agreement didn't already exist. The bill called for a clear history of rental prices, as though knowing what someone paid for this unit last year or 10 years ago has any effect on the market and your ability to negotiate. Is that what the government thinks? We need John and Susie to negotiate by knowing what the rent is. Are they going to negotiate when there's 14 other offers, right? Doesn't make any sense to me. The bill called for credit bureaus to consider rental payment history, as though this would make homes more affordable in Canada. It was another day, another example of political posturing by an out-of-touch government. Now, next month, May 27th, I wrote, Monday Morning Quarterback, your governments are lying to you about housing. The impetus for this blog was a comment made by Housing Minister Sean Miller. Canada will solve the housing crisis. Let me try that again. Canada can and will solve the housing crisis. I mean, I don't know what the guy sounds like. Maybe it's more of a pipsqueaky. I'm picturing like this little guy that you're like, this guy's not going to be the guy. Canada can and will solve the housing crisis. That's probably it, right? That kind of guy. I don't know what he looks like. I call BS on that because I'm going to think of a scene from Boiler Room. And you know the movie Boiler Room? It's about guys that sell crappy stocks. And one of the guys is lying to someone on the phone. And he says, I just lost you $80,000. There was nobody who's going to work as hard as I will to make it back up to you. You see where I'm going with this? The people that put us in this position are not the people who are going to get us out of the problem. For Sean Miller to say Canada can and will solve the housing crisis is absolute nonsense. The government continues to tax real estate development and construction to death while stealing, yes, I use that word, from hardworking, law-abiding, tax-paying citizens and simultaneously blaming individuals, corporations, developers, and anyone or any group other than those in power and political offices. And the Trudeau government, promised to build an average of 552,857 new homes every year for the next 7 years. Remember their promise? I think it was we're going to build 3.5 million homes. Over the last 10 years, new homes in Canada have averaged 197,000 a year. Trudeau says we're going to build 552,000 a year. Why does anybody listen to this? There are people out there that are still going to vote for this guy. And I understand there's, more at stake. And I don't want to get into a political argument, but some of the folks I've heard here, maybe just as I could gaslight the Liberals for some things, you could gaslight the Conservatives or the NDP or the Greens or the Natural Law Party for that matter. But my God, are these the wrong people to lead us moving forward? So in this blog post, I told the following truths. Truth number 1, real estate has been made more expensive in part because of the government. Truth number 2, the construction of real estate has been more difficult and more expensive in part because of the government. Truth number 3, the act of purchasing real estate has been more difficult because of the government. Following up on point number 3, this means the act of selling real estate has been made more difficult because of the government. Your governments are lying to you about housing. That was a real banger. Now, July 15th, I wrote another Monday morning quarterback. By the way, Monday morning quarterback, in case you're not familiar with the slogan, is football games are played on Sunday. The Monday morning quarterback is somebody who has hindsight. You can say, you know what I think? It's like, dude, the games were played yesterday. So Monday morning quarterback to me is when something happens the previous week and then I write about it on my blog. Monday morning quarterback, the ludicrous home equity tax. And for this blog post, I chose a feature photo of a thief stealing a wallet out of somebody's purse because that's exactly what the notion of a home equity tax is. It is thievery. And if you want to get really amped up, go and watch the video of Justin Trudeau sitting down for like a fireside chat with Generation Squeeze founder and massive communist Paul Kershaw to discuss fairness in Canada in 2024. They have a very unique definition of fairness, considering we were told from a young age not to take things that don't belong to you. That was probably one of the most angry posts I wrote in 2024. Moving forward, we went to the topic of taxation again. December 9th, I wrote a blog post called Tax Breaks for Developers Are Not Going to Be Popular Words. This blog post was about this open letter signed by a group of prominent housing developers that was sent to the 3 levels of government, highlighting the absurd amount of taxes that are buried in the purchase price of any new unit of housing. And they asked the government to reduce the taxes and promised to return that same amount to the consumer. Governments aren't going to do that because they need money for things like blank. I said I didn't want to make it political. Fill in blank with all of the causes that I don't agree with. Somebody wrote on my blog the other day, the government's not making money. They're generating revenue to pay for things like roads and utilities. And I'm like, yes, but if it cost $1 for the roads and utilities, they're bringing in $5. Then they're spending the other $4 on BS. I censored myself there, trying to quit swearing for my son. Aren't we all? So the tax breaks for developers, they're not going to be popular words. And that's the title that I chose. But I think that was a really good opening salvo to the last post I wrote, which I'm going to save for you. I've already referenced it. But in the fall, September 23rd, I wrote, again, Monday morning quarterback, higher mortgage insurance cap and longer amortizations. Some will agree that it was time to increase the mortgage insurance cap from $1 million to $1.5 million, based on the fact the average home price has essentially doubled since the cap was put into place. But others don't like the idea that the government's increasing affordability by encouraging Canadians to take on more debt. And oh yeah, by the way, it's going to be backstopped by the CMHC on the backs of taxpayers. So later in the month, I went back to my angry posts again. I wrote something called Testing Theories on the Housing Crisis in 2024. Now, this was based on a study, the Greater Toronto Area Municipal Benchmarking Study, that had some unbelievable insights and statistics. Now, here were the theories that I tested. And by theories tested, I basically was writing a point, with the benefit of hindsight. Theory number 1, immigration levels are too high relative to housing. Then I hammered away at this and backed it up with actual statistics from the study. Theory number 2, it takes way too long to get anything built. Absolutely. I believe I showed, I wish I had it in front of me, but again, we're trying to get this done in an hour. The amount of time that it takes to do anything is unbelievable. And then the fact that studies were brought in and changes were made and all this fanfare of how we're going to reduce the 22 months to, 21.7. And oh yeah, it also showed you how much every month of delay costs the end user. Theory number 3, nobody's building anymore. Yeah. Theory number 4, the municipalities are driving up the price of new construction. Spoiler alert, I blame the government yet again for driving up the price of real estate, making development difficult and expensive, and overpopulating a country already suffering from a housing shortage. Now, all this leads up to this post that I wrote December 9th. I wrote this post even though I was planning year-end content because I couldn't wait till January. I had a full schedule, guys. Like, I'm going to be honest with you. All of a sudden, I'm taking the glasses off. Like, that makes me more honest. It's the end of the year, guys. Like, I am done. I'm burned out, okay? And I don't burn out. But when I got an email from the buyer agent for a downtown condo telling me that there was a light bulb out and he wanted me to replace it before his clients took possession, that was the point when I was like, okay, yeah, no, guys, I think I'm done. So having said that, imagine how important this blog post was to me to say, I'm going to put all my year-end content on hold and work more and write this blog post because I wrote on December 9th, the increasing tax burden on new Ontario homes. And it was a banger. This was everything I've been talking about leading up to this moment, but with statistics. 35.6% of the price of the average new home in Ontario is made up of taxes. It was quite the year for the intersection of the 3 level of government in our housing market, or my housing crisis. But something tells me this will be a topic of conversation next year yet again. It's funny because I didn't have that statistic when I started the beginning of the year. I've been talking about how much of an impact the government has on the price of real estate and how much taxes are playing a role. And I estimated at 25 to 30%. And along came that study. And that is why I put everything for the year on hold to go and write that. We have one more story to get to. But first, I need a break. And maybe I'll top up on my coffee. Be right back. Welcome back. And we are now ready to unveil what I believe was the number one story of the 2024 real estate market, at least through the lens of Toronto Realty blog. And that's something that I call pricing and strategies in a changing market. Now, that might sound a lot like changing business practices amid a changing market. That was the number 4 story of 2023. But here's the thing. I called this pricing and strategies in a changing market. And if you're watching on YouTube, you saw I used air quotes. If you're listening, well, I need to specify. I meant strategies sarcastically because the number one story of the year, in my opinion, in the real estate market was pricing and prices and the way that buyers and sellers interacted, or at least attempted to, well, sellers and listing agents did absolutely insane things. Now, my team and I, we had some pretty good listings. We had some pretty good pricing strategies, some pretty good marketing strategies. I'm not talking about underlisting a property and holding back offers. I'm talking about the things that we witnessed that I consistently wrote about on Toronto Realty blog all throughout the year, which I believe was part of the reason why so few units actually changed hands. Now, we'll start here, February 1st, 2024. I wrote the following blog. 85 offers on a home. What in the world happened? Now, the secret sauce wasn't anything that innovative. This was a house that sold for $600,000 and change in 2017 that they listed for $600,000 and change in 2024. It was actually $699,000. Now, it was a house that was probably worth between $950,000 and $1 million, and they sold it for $999,000. So, yeah, I mean, you sold it. But the fact that there were 85 offers made us all look stupid. So if I got 14 offers on a listing in a hot market, a lukewarm market, okay, I probably did a good job. You need leverage in this business. If you have a property that you think is worth $1.2 million and you price it at $999, you get 14 offers, you could probably use that leverage to push the price past $1.2 million. If you've got 85 offers on a house, I don't really know that you did a good job or a good thing. Now, if you want to find fault with that, fine. David, where's the middle ground? This is a gray area. 14 offers, good for David. 85 offers, bad for a guy who got himself written up about multiple times in the newspaper. I think it was brilliant marketing by the agent on a personal level. And this agent actually parlayed this into a couple of other stories. And it looks like a couple of other listings because this was repeated a few times as well. What I would say in defense of this agent and what I said throughout the blog post is essentially, if this house is worth $1 million and you've got a client with a budget of $700 and it's listed at $699 and you make that offer, don't blame this agent. It's not this agent's fault. And to be perfectly honest, I don't think this agent did anything wrong. Price it at $1. Price it at $499, $599, $699, $799, whatever it is. I still put the blame and the onus on the buyer for making stupid offers. March 14th, I wrote a blog post called The Psychology of Real Estate Pricing. Now, this was a fun one. It's always sort of been in the back of my mind. I've always wanted to write this. I finally put pen to paper on this. And we talked about psychological pricing. We traced back the origin of the 99 cents. Everything always ends in 99 cents. And we talked about how we price properties. So we'll list something at $499,900. But if it's over $1 million, $1,499,000. We drop the 900. We don't use 800s, 1,499,000, 800. I gave a bunch of examples. And for example, I said, I don't use the eights. 1,499,888. That's a cultural thing. We don't use 777. We don't use odd numbers. If you were to list a property for $428,741 as opposed to $429,900, I think the former just confuses and turns people off. So, I said random numbers are ridiculous. I'm floored when I see even numbers, 700,000. Why not price at $699,900? It was a fun blog post. Now that led me to a blog post called The Psychology of Real Estate Pricing, a Real World Example. So this blog post was one where I wrote and examined the 20 bids that were submitted on a property that we had for sale with an offer date. The psychology of real estate pricing. Essentially, we had a listing in Mississauga where we priced for $899,900 with an offer date, but the identical property 2 doors down had just sold for $950,000. So if you see that property selling for $950,000 and ours is $899,000 with an offer date, why are you offering $899,000? Now, when I say identical, look, we're better agents. We had better marketing. They sold it in as-is condition. That was a massive mistake. They didn't have an open house. They didn't have a sign on the front lawn. There are a lot of things that we did better. But it was very interesting to see how people make bids. And within that, we saw from an offer standpoint when they used 900, when they used 777, when they used a random number. Now, it doesn't really matter because the highest price is ultimately going to prevail. But that was an interesting follow-up to the psychology of real estate pricing. May 13th, I wrote, it's almost relisting season. Now, this was a very sarcastic blog about just how many sellers or listing agents will list a property over and over when it has no chance of selling via those prices or quote-unquote strategies. But it was merely a sign of things to come in the market ahead, because as the market continued along and sellers weren't getting the prices they wanted, or prices weren't increasing, or let's say properties weren't selling as quickly as people hoped or expected, instead of people adapting to the market, sellers and agents out there just got even more ridiculous. June 3rd, I wrote how not to sell real estate in Toronto. Now, this was a real life example where I showed a property for sale in a townhouse complex and then a property for sale in a townhouse complex. What? Wait, huh? Yeah, one was from a different agent and one was from us. This agent was so insane, and I called him first and just said I was a buyer agent, wanted to know his strategy, and he was so full of you-know-what. Then I called him later as a different agent because he clearly didn't remember or save my number, and said I'm bringing out a competing unit. We sold our property for not a record price because, again, and this is one of my investor clients, record price in that complex was 2022. We sold it for an excellent price. And when the property closed, 3 months later, this guy was still on the market on his 6th listing at his 9th different price. Just a sign of things to come as we move through the 2024 market. July 2nd, I wrote, don't overplay your hand. Now, this was yet another insane story about a house listed over and over with different prices, different strategies, multiple offer dates. And through the end of 2024, Keeping in mind this was a July post, this house is still listed for sale. July 22nd, I wrote Monday morning quarterback define desperate. Now, this was in response to a newspaper article about a guy who was having trouble selling his condo. The problem I had with the article was it completely ignored all the facts. The property was massively overpriced. The seller was incredibly entitled. The market doesn't owe anybody anything, and so on. And I felt bad on the one hand, critiquing a person that had the guts to put his name and his photo and his address out in the media. But at the same time, I critiqued the person that put his name and his photo and his address out in the media. He was doing it for publicity and good for him. But at the same time, I had to call out the nonsense that was involved. You're asking too much money for the property. Things like, I can't afford to sell it at this. I have an issue with that. Can't afford why? You mean you don't want to? I can't afford to take a loss. No, you don't want to take a loss. And again, I have sympathy for people that lose money doing anything. But if you put money in Bitcoin and you lost money, people will be like, well, yeah. Bitcoin is clearly not the same as real estate. I'm just making a point. People don't believe that they should ever have to consider taking a loss in real estate. And maybe we've just led them to believe that because the market's done nothing but go up for 20 years. But in between, if you buy in 2022 and try to sell in 2024 and the market's lower, I mean, it's 2 years. Yes, the market's done nothing but go up for 20 years. And in between, there are ebbs and flows. And here was somebody that bought in a problem building that was a known problem building with multiple red flags and then continued to talk about how other people in the building asking less for their units are driving the prices down. Now, September 12th, I wrote, listing for $1, a strategy destined for failure. Spoiler alert, that strategy failed. This was, again, that media puff piece, which is, look at this person being so innovative, listing for $1. No, this person had previously listed, say it was $1,499,000 with an offer date, it didn't work. They relisted $1,800,000, it didn't work. They relisted $1,799,000, didn't work. Listed $1,299,000 with an offer date, and didn't work, and keep going. And now they're listed at $1. And you wrote an article talking about how innovative it was. It was stupid, was what it was. It was asinine. I got a call from a lady. Actually, first it was an email and then a call from somebody that just kind of randomly emailed and said, do you have any buyers in this area? I've got a property for sale. I looked up the listing history. Property was last listed for $1,799. The house next door is identical. It's in a subdivision on the market for 100 days at $1,499. And I thought, I wrote the person back, what do you want for it? Phone rings. It was a UK number. I was like, I recognize the name. I'm not answering this. Phone rings again the next day. Email. Hey, you were expressing interest in buying my house? No one wants to buy your house for $1,800,000 because it's worth $1,400,000. Your neighbor next door is listed for $1,499, has been on the market 100 days. I didn't say that because frankly, I don't know the person that. They're a cold caller. They randomly messaged me. And in the end, it was one of those, and I put this in a podcast earlier, we're looking for companies that buy homes in cash. Don't even get me started on that. But again, that strategy doesn't work. That strategy. I can't sell it on the open market. I'll take it off, and then I'll randomly email real estate agents asking them, do you have anyone that wants to pay 130% of fair market value? Now, October 28th, I wrote the worst listing strategy I've ever seen. Strategy in air quotes, if you will. Having been in the business for 20 years and having written on Toronto Realty blog for 17 of those, it takes a lot to suggest that a listing strategy is the worst ever. But I did an entire podcast on this house that was listed, ready? 11 times at 39 prices with 4 offer dates via 4 different listing brokers. 592 days on the market and counting. Now, last but not least, I wrote a mid-fall, well, not mid-fall, what was this? November 4th. So 2/3 of the way through the fall market. I wrote a post where I essentially blamed would-be sellers for the lack of sales in 2024, namely in the fall market, which had been sluggish. And I called the blog post, It Takes Two to Tango, Why Sales Are Sluggish This Fall. There is a buyer and seller in every real estate transaction. There's a buyer and seller in every attempted real estate transaction. And based on what I saw through the fall, working with both buyers and sellers, I confidently concluded that too many sellers have expectations out of line with the current market, and too many sellers and their quote unquote game playing combined to keep sales down in the fall market. I detailed real life situations where I had made an offer on a property and what happened from there. And the crazy thing is we're sitting here, it's December now, and these properties are still listed. So listen, maybe these folks are geniuses. They don't need to sell. They'll wait till next year when the market's better. But also, maybe they just have no idea what they're doing. And all of this combined to essentially create a fall market where nothing's sold. I can't remember the last time I saw so many failed pricing strategies, so many bad listings, and so many sellers and real estate agents completely out of touch with the market. And that was my number one story of the year. Pricing and listing strategies, quote unquote, in a changing market. So there you have it, folks. Number 5 story, the death of pre-construction condos. Number 4, the role of investors in the market. Number 3, simply put, sales. Number 4, the role of government in the real estate market and industry. And the number 1 story of the year, pricing and strategies. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this year-end recap as much as I did. Thank you so much for all your support here on the Last Honest Realtor throughout 2024. Please leave us a comment if you're watching on YouTube. Please remember to like, comment, or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Have a safe and happy holiday season and New Year's, and we'll see you in 2025 here on the Last Honest Realtor.